In 1876, St. Louis committed an act of economic secession that was described as being as consequential as England losing the 13 colonies, except they chose it themselves. In this episode, we're looking at the Great Divorce of 1876 and the blueprint to finally get us all back together. This is Joey Barr, and welcome to the Lou-conomy, my fellow St. Louisans. Today in the Lou-conomy, we have guest speaker Gabriel Souza.
Hello everyone, I'm Gabriel Souza, and I'm excited to discuss the topic we have in store today. As Joey and I have experienced the current situation in St. Louis City, and are honestly disturbed by how long this has gone on when there's such an easy fix.
I agree wholeheartedly, Gabriel. Today in the Lou-conomy, we will be discussing the Great Divorce of 1876 and its unintended consequences on the future of St. Louis. Me and Gabriel actually have some experience on just how bad the situation really is. You see, his dad does house flipping jobs in the heart of North City, and he sometimes brings Gabriel and I along with him.
Yeah man, it gets pretty rough out there. The sheer amount of abandoned neighborhoods and impoverished communities is insane, and frankly unacceptable. About the Great Divorce Act of 1876. Joey and I will also be discussing the possible solutions that we think will be highly beneficial to fix these problems caused by the Great Divorce Act of 1876.
Just to give you some background. Wait, you think we should turn those lights off?
Yeah man.
Thank you very much. So, as I was saying, just to give you some background, the Great Divorce Act was a secession act from St. Louis City that was signed off in 1876 that seceded the city from the county. And it was initially signed to benefit the rich middle class of St. Louis City, as they claimed that they did not want to fund the infrastructure in the rural county, as they did not deem it necessary at all, and they claimed that they were being taxed without representation.
And the numbers really back that up. At the time, the city had a population of about 310,000 people, while the entire county only had around 30,000 people. Yet the city was footing the bill for roads and bridges across that massive rural area that most city dwellers will never even see.
Exactly.
And about the taxation without representation thing, I saw an article next to STL by Joe Huber that drew some striking similarities between the American Revolution and the conditions present during the 1870s in St. Louis. Now, obviously, the conditions were not nearly as severe, but I thought it was interesting how it was like the American Revolution, but in reverse. The capitalists in St. Louis being the Americans in this case, and the farmers in the county being the British. The capitalists in St. Louis wished to kick out the farmers in the county because they felt that the tax dollars were being used ineffectively. And they were frustrated that they couldn't actually see what the tax dollars were being used for, which is similar to the American Revolution because the Americans in this case, the 18th century, felt underrepresented as their tax dollars were being used to fund affairs in England rather than the American colonies.
Yeah, when you showed me that article, I felt like that comparison really helped me understand the circumstances of the Great Divorce of 1876 a lot more. I feel like the Great Divorce of 1876 and its consequences is one of the best examples of how detrimental prioritizing short-term gratification over long-term growth truly can be. In this article by Joe Huber, he uses a quote by Howard F. Baer stating, and I quote, "This action was roughly equivalent in economic consequences to England's giving up the 13 colonies. Only the city did it from choice, whereas Great Britain at least had the good sense to struggle, if but half-heartedly, against the separation."
And in the 19th century, during the highest period of growth in St. Louis City, we saw a huge influx of transportation being built that goes to the city, since that's where all the jobs were at this time, but also there was a severe lack of transportation systems being built that go from the city to the county, which I feel in the modern day has really systematically trapped the St. Louisians that live in the city, despite the jobs being out here in the county.
Yeah, I actually saw a super insane and depressing statistic while researching for this episode, and it's from the East-West Gateway Council of Governments in 2018, and it states the fact that 63% of jobs in the greater St. Louis region are over an hour commute for residents that live in St. Louis City, which I feel like is only further contributing to the poverty and unemployment that is plaguing modern-day St. Louis City.
Wow, that really puts into perspective how detrimental 1876 was, doesn't it? That statistic shows that 63% of the jobs in the greater regional economy are completely locked off to the dwellers of the St. Louis City. It's almost like the St. Louis City dwellers of 1876 thought that they were shaving off the fat, but accidentally cut off the main arteries that were providing to this economy.
Yeah, that statistic really blew my mind when I first heard it. But the lack of transportation caused by 1876 is merely one of the many detriments that it has had on our economy. I mean, in a free market society, it's only natural that competition is a large driver in the success of certain firms or regions. And after the Great Divorce Act of 1876, the governments of St. Louis City and St. Louis County started competing in a sort of tax tug-of-war match with businesses.
Oh, tax cuts. Excessive ones, I assume.
Yep.
This situation I've been seeing so many times throughout the world, and I feel like it's just one of those things that comes with the capitalist free market system, and you don't usually see it within a city and a county, and it's usually between either different states or different countries.
Yeah, and whenever it is between two bodies that are part of the same regional economy, such as St. Louis City and St. Louis County are, it means that there is no economic growth occurring in the region itself. Rather, firms are simply moving for more profit. I actually read a Harvard student's review on this topic. Kevin By claimed that countries, or in this case city and county, just means separate bodies in general, often engage in a collective decline in tax rates in order to attract businesses and venture capital. We see this occurring within our own regional economy, and this collective decline in tax rates just causes the fiscal base to decline.
This whole ordeal is really emphasizing the detriment of short-term benefit over long-term growth. First, the Great Divorce, and now with the collective tax decline.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, when I read Kevin By's review, I saw that governments can experience corporate tax revenue declines of over 20% because of the need to keep up with low tax rates, and this loss of tax revenue directly contributes to a lack of investment by the government into infrastructure economic growth.
Wow. This whole collective tax decline tug of war thing we got going on here really doesn't benefit anyone but the corporations, doesn't it?
Exactly, dude. And the city-county divide truly doesn't benefit anyone in the St. Louis City or St. Louis County, unless you're a CEO.
Damn, that is really crazy. A lot of people don't realize how important taxes truly are to keeping our society stable. Speaking of taxes, how was your parents' tax season this year? Did you discuss it with them?
Yeah, I did discuss it with them. They said that it was extremely frustrating. I'm frustrated myself knowing that in St. Louis, my parents are paying more than they would have in a city with a centralized government.
So what exactly do you mean by that? Like, how are they paying more?
Are you familiar with the theory of economies of scale?
Yeah. We talked about it in econ last year.
Economies of scale are extremely applicable to bureaucracy, and it's seen in our city's bureaucracy extensively. Maddie and Hall, in a Lindenwood University study, put this in comparison really well when they made the analogy, and I quote, like how a larger factory reduces the cost of each item made. A larger government can provide services like trash, roads, and permitting at a lower per unit cost.
Mm-hmm.
When this concept is applied to government, it can be represented as many small governments that work independently, not being as efficient as one large government, which means that our tax dollars will be used far more efficiently if our government was centralized.
That does make sense. So basically what you're saying is that if the city and county were not divided, we would be spending less tax dollars on bureaucracy?
Yes. In fact, I came across a statistic before this podcast that really puts into perspective the per capita detriment of having a bureaucracy blow to this scale. Lifelitz stated in a Better Together report, in 2014, St. Louis City, St. Louis County, and the 90 municipal governments in St. Louis County spent exactly $281,078,709 on general administration. Per capita, a resident of the St. Louis region paid $213.16 solely on general administrative costs in 2014.
So that doesn't really, like... I don't really know. Is that bad? Like, what's the significance behind this? Like, I can't tell if that's, like, bad. I'm just hearing the numbers, like... Can you inform me?
Allow me to explain. Now, this metric doesn't seem bad until you compare it relatively to other cities' administration costs. Lifelitz in the Better Together source suggests that St. Louis spends $213 per person in bureaucracy, while a merged city like Louisville spends only $126. This shows the redundancy and extra cost of extra bureaucracy in St. Louis, and the government of Louisville spends around $87 less in bureaucracy per person, and these cities are largely similar in size, but Louisville has a centralized government while St. Louis has a divided, decentralized government.
That does make a lot more sense now. The Lindenwood article provides us the application of the theory you mentioned earlier, that being economies of scale, to bureaucracy. And the Better Together statistic shows the difference in price between the two cities. And I feel like it does a good job showing this theory in practice. And I think This price differential proves why your parents have a justified distaste for taxes more than, for instance, someone living in Chicago or Louisville. But on a serious note, it is very frustrating knowing that our city's bureaucracy bloat is reducing our long-run economic growth with our parents' tax dollars in the ways that we previously mentioned. Wow, man. I truly wonder what our city would be like if we eliminated this bureaucracy bloat and finally decided to merge the city and the county. This possibility is truly intriguing, and it makes you think, would businesses and sports teams such as the Rams or Tim Hortons still be in St. Louis if the city and county were merged? And what other sports teams are...
Even major corporate headquarters like Boeing or Centene. Good question, Joey. If we look at the data involving what our city would be like if we eliminated bureaucracy bloat, the answers are clear.
So what exactly is the data saying?
Good question. As for the information regarding what our city would be like if we eliminated the bureaucracy bloat, it's often mentioned in the assessment of the effectiveness and fiscal impact by the East-West Gateway that St. Louis has a decentralized economic system, meaning a large chunk of different self-governing cities all create their own separate tax deals to compete for the same business.
So pretty much what you're saying is that, in comparison, centralized regions have a single shared goal, and they all have a unified vision in terms of economy, and they're not like competing all for the same businesses, like how we mentioned earlier about how like the movement between businesses in St. Louis, since it's decentralized, means that there's no new business being created in the region, but it's just being moved from one part of the region to another, and the fiscal base is declining because of this.
Correct, Joey. This lack of a central plan in St. Louis also brings me to mention how a centralized government has a higher fiscal base due to their centralization, and how they also have an advanced infrastructure due to this. This decentralization that is present in our city leads me to quote East-West Gateway once more, and I quote, that decentralized data sources complicate the aggregation of useful data and make it difficult to analyze the extent and impact of tax deals.
So basically, this evidence from East-West Gateway, it's giving us a lot of ideas, like including the fact that if St. Louis were to take a centralized approach with our economy, for instance, the logistics would turn inside out, and the difficulty to analyze tax deals would be totally reversed, because it would all be one centralized data source. It wouldn't be a bunch of decentralized data sources like what we have right now with the 90 municipalities, the city, all that stuff. It's all tying back to what we were talking about earlier regarding Kevin Bai's collective tax decline theory.
Speaking of 90-plus municipalities and reducing bureaucracy bloat, I believe combining small police departments into a single unified system like the one in Greater Salt Lake is highly applicable to that of St. Louis and will be highly beneficial.
Yeah, can you explain to me exactly how this system would work in St. Louis and how it could be applied through a St. Louis city and county merger?
My pleasure. As you may already know, the application of this system will enable cities to share the high cost of specialized services.
Yeah, that makes sense, I see.
My pleasure. As you may already know, the application of this system will enable cities to share the high cost of specialized services.
Yeah, and I thought you bring that up because I feel like it provides good evidence against the usual counter-argument against the city-county merger, that being the people in the county don't want to compensate for like the infrastructure and the departments in the city. But I feel like this is good evidence because it provides the fact that our police department being better, exponentially better, is something that all St. Louis's can agree that is good for our city. And me personally, even though I don't pay taxes, I would be more than happy to pay more taxes if it means that our police department is actually effective in their training, in everything. I just think it would be extremely beneficial to our city.
I personally wouldn't hesitate to pay extra taxes either. Before we get carried away, I would also like to mention that it makes sure professional standards are held strong, as 70% of major police forces are now combining functions to maintain quality in their services despite the budget cuts. This is an insane extension to their toolkit, as it allows them to do much more for much less for locals.
Yeah, dude, that efficiency makes total sense. I think the reason on why we haven't done it yet is the fact that people in places like Kirkwood or Webster Groves would lose their sense of local identity. Those two municipalities definitely fear joining up, as the culture between them is rooted in rivalry, such as the Turkey Bowl that takes place every year on Thanksgiving, in which the Kirkwood and Webster Groves high school football teams play each other in a game, and this rivalry gets very intense, for they most likely fear that merging would require abandoning this tradition. Man, last year when we went to that game, it got pretty chaotic, both on and off the field.
Yeah, dude. I remember that. This graph shows the amount of times we went before it.
Yeah, dude, thanks for bringing that graph to prove it. It honestly seems to me that the initial rules set by the capitalists living in St. Louis City have reversed. And now it's the county not wanting to pay for the city's infrastructure. Gabriel, what is your personal opinion on a solution that would get the majority of St. Louis County voting age residents to be on board with the city-county merger?
I do truly believe that a system mirroring out the councils in London or the boroughs in New York City would work extremely well in St. Louis. New York City before the borough system bears many similarities to modern-day St. Louis in regards to local pride, which in both cities made it hard for there to be a proper merging deal.
Wow. With how put together New York City seems, it's insane to think that they bear a similar backstory to us. How exactly did they go about doing this?
The similarity is almost uncanny, isn't it? Speaking of which, we can also see the uncanny effectiveness when the article titled Bronx D mentions the separation stages of New York City into a borough through its statement that includes Bronx, which has been the lower portion of Westchester County in two stages in 1874 and 1895, with the consolidation of New York City in 1898. It became a separate borough. The county was not organized until 1914. The mainland borough of the New York City, it comprises of the southern part of a peninsula bordered on the west by the Hudson River, on the southwest by the Harlem River, on the south by the East River, and on the east by the Long Island Sound.
What you're getting at is that Bronx D demonstrates how this borough system allows a smaller region such as the Bronx to join a larger one such as New York City without losing its history and culture.
Correct again. The Bronx was originally a part of Westchester County. It was acquired by New York City before officially becoming a separate borough during the city's consolidation in 1898. This merger, interestingly, never allowed the areas to actually benefit from the region's intensive projects because the extension of subway lines and bridges caused the population to grow and the economy to eventually modernize, all while keeping them both the area's distinct name and community borders intact.
Man, that is exactly the kind of blueprint that St. Louis needs. It proves that we can unify our economy without erasing the unique identities of our local neighborhoods.
Exactly, Joey. Centralization isn't about erasing our local communities. It's about making sure our collective tax dollars actually work for us instead of getting wasted in redundant systems.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's episode. A massive thank you to Gabriel Souza for joining us and breaking down the numbers for us.
Thanks for having me, Joey. Hopefully our fellow St. Louisians see that the damage done in 1876 doesn't have to be permanent.
Absolutely. And to the listener, if you want to see this changed in St. Louis as much as we do, contact your local representative. Visit the Better Together website and spread the word of the possible benefits that would come with a merger of the city and the county. Until next time, this is Joey.
And Gabriel.
Goodbye, Lou-conomy.